law had to go to Dar es Salaam. So it's him and Professor Kakoza who start this initiative, where now everyone wants to associate. So as he starts the law department in social sciences, Idi Amin takes over in the subsequent years. He stayed around during the Idi Amin, a couple of years during the Idi Amin years, and then he had to leave, going back to exile. Once he leaves, Idi Amin is overthrown by a combination of Tanzania and Ugandan dissidents. He was part of the Moshi debates that established the UNLF government, the unstable government. First was Lule, who was president for 68 days. So Lule appointed Kanyeihamba, minister, or call him Attorney General. But Kanyeihamba was hesitant to take on that role because Lule had appointed Professor Dan Wadada Nabdede as Minister of Justice. And Kanyeihamba...
Are we still on? I think we're having a challenge with some sound. I hope you can all hear us. I do not... You know, these days X has some sound challenges, I think. But I think we're now back on. I hope you can all hear us. Derek was still giving us the quick rundown on the life of Professor Kanyeihamba and how he helped to start the law school, and how before he started the law school, we had lawyers weren't able to get law degrees from Uganda. That is why the older generation of lawyers, the Professor Sempebwas, the John Kawangas, the Jonathan Kateras, were all foreign-trained lawyers. Please, Derek, continue.
So, during, like I had explained, during that time, Amin was the president. Obote had been overthrown. Amin became president, and Amin, of course, his history is known. He targeted elites in this country. He targeted intellectuals. They were fleeing the country, going into exile, university lecturers, and everyone. Kanyeihamba stayed on, but he also had to flee later. He went back to the UK. And then it was during that time that dissidents and the Tanzanian forces overthrew Idi Amin, and Kanyeihamba was engaged in the Moshi debates that midwifed the UNLF government, the unstable UNLF government. So the Yusufule regime of 68 days appointed Kanyeihamba, the Attorney General, but he was hesitant. He was hesitant. He was saying, I can't take on this job when the Minister of Justice, who is supposed to be my boss, is Professor Dan Wadada Nabdede. Dan Wadada Nabdede is a professor, but Kanyehamba's problems or issues with Dan Wadada Nabdede, who passed on a couple of years ago, in 2012, were that he was a communist, while Kanyeihamba was a Democrat, a social Democrat who belonged to the UK's Labour Party. So for him, there was a clash in ideology, and the other one was not even a lawyer, so he couldn't serve under him. So he told Lule, under no circumstances was he going to take on the job of being Attorney General. So what Lule did was to transfer Professor Nabdede to another docket, and then Kanyeihamba took on that role. It was short-lived, but he talks about standing up to Nyerere, because Nyerere basically was taking the Ugandan regime at the time, as kids, he would summon them to Tanzania, tell them what to do. I want Obote back. I want this. And Kanyeihamba told him, we're a state of our own. You can't be summoning us as if we are kids. And then they returned here. So once they returned here, of course, he talks about the instability within the UN government. People who wanted Obote back, and then there was Rule. So Rule was removed by people who wanted Obote back. People like Oito Jok, the UPC stalwarts who wanted Obote back. 68 days, and Kanyeihamba to go back to exile, actually. He fled dramatically to exile once again. So while in exile, he has moved, and now he became part of the UPM. The UPM is now what we have as the regime in power, the NRM. So he became part of the external wing of the NRM, and he was even involved in the Nairobi peace talks that didn't go that far. So after the current regime takes over in 1986, Kanyeihamba returns to Uganda. He's appointed. He did make it to the first cabinet. It took a couple of years for him to be appointed the Minister of Commerce. He replaced Nyanzi, who was part of that broad-based government, because Nyanzi was a DP ideologue. He was accused of treason. And then Kanyeihamba came in as a substitute for that. So he serves as Minister of Commerce in those years of barter trade. So those ideas that you hear about barter trade was in the center of them. Then the Attorney General at the time was his friend, Justice Mulenga, who passed on in 2013. Justice Mulenga and Kanyeihamba had met in UK, and they studied law together. They are very tight friends. Justice Mulenga was a DP ideologue, while Kanyeihamba was an NRM ideologue. So once there's a reshuffle, Kanyeihamba comes in to replace his friend. He serves as Attorney General. Then he's reshuffled out of cabinet forever after a couple of years. He's appointed a senior presidential advisor. Then during that process, there is the Constituent Assembly. He represented his home area, Rwanda, and played a key role, like Elson said, in the drafting of the Constitution. He was very proud of the Constitution that was drafted. He was really very proud of that Constitution, full of his ideas. 1995, he says he was not meant for politics.
And then, no,
He was
they're not hearing me. Send the microphone to you, so.
Sorry, we are still having a few sound challenges, but if you're just joining us, we are taking a break to our usual programming to recognize the contribution of a son of Uganda, a patriot, a justice, a lawyer, a man whose contribution we now know, or we are hearing, includes the establishment of the law school at Makerere, so that we can indigenize law. A man whose contributions as Attorney General of this country, he served both in the Lule and in the initial years of the NRM government. And we are with Derek. Derek, we're going to give you another 4 or 5 minutes. After that, we shall listen to other eminent speakers. I see we have been joined by Mr. Nicholas Opio, I can see we have been joined by Mr. Isaac Semakade, President of the Uganda Law Society. I see we've been joined by Mr. Ivan Okuda and a number of other people. Many of these are people who had personal and intimate knowledge of Justice Kanyeihamba, who worked with him closely, who served under him, who did cases with him. And so, Derek, if you could just wind up. Derek is giving us the bird's eye view of Kanyeihamba's life as the journalist who has written extensively about Justice Kanyeihamba. And I can tell you, without fear, that of contradiction, that much of what you're hearing from Derek, he hasn't read it today. He knows the man pretty well. So, Derek, over to you. I think we had some sound challenges. I hope the sound is now better. If you could just give us a snapshot of Kanyeihamba briefly, and then we move to another speaker.
Then, when after the CA, he decides not to go back into politics. Because Uganda had no Supreme Court at that time, so the 1995 Constitution introduced the idea of the Supreme Court in Uganda, and then Kanyeihamba applied for the job. It came with its controversy. The opposition said, accused Kanyeihamba of being an NRM ideologue who would be biased. And then his friend Mulenga was being accused of being DP. So to balance it out, they said, okay, let's have both of them. Also, another challenge was his practice in law. He was a professor and academic, but there were question marks whether he had been in court for quite some time. He challenged them that he had appeared in court for quite some time, and eventually, after back and forth, everything, Kanyehamba's, everything was a struggle. Wherever he went, he struggled. He's a man of struggle. So he eventually made it to the Supreme Court. The first case, as people elaborate later, is the Tinyefuza case that he was so proud. He claims, or he says, he saved the UPDF. Because if he had ruled otherwise, people would have deserted the army as they wished. So he serves at the Supreme Court. Eventually, you have to retire. Then he had to retire, of course. And in terms of personality, as a journalist, he was a very, very abrasive and assertive person. If you were not strong, if you were not up to it, you were not going to interact with him. Intellectually, you have to be up there. You had to be strong emotionally. If you are weak, he never wanted weak people. He wanted strong people. He wanted assertive people because, like him, he was assertive. Because he said he was born in the forest, and forests bring strong people. So that was in nature. He was a non-nonsense person, but yet again, he was very understanding in the same goal. You could quarrel with him in the morning, in the afternoon, you are having fun, like nothing has ever happened. That was Kanyeihamba briefly.
Thank you very much, Terry. We've heard about Kanyeihamba, the life story of Justice Kanyeihamba in a snapshot from a person who has written the most. Not just about Justice Kanyeihamba. To be fair, Derek's contribution isn't, I wouldn't call him a Kanyehambaist. I would call him a chronicler of our legal profession in this country. And I think that almost every lawyer who is about to speak on this space, most of what has ever been written about them has been written by Derek Chionga. I don't know if the president of the Law Society is on. I see, I don't know if Ivan is on as well, Okuda. I see Mr. Nicholas Opio. Mr. Opio, if you could just give us your 5-minute snapshot of Justice Kanyeihamba. I'm sure that even Nicholas himself has been written extensively on by Derek. So you can see they'll tell us, Derek will also tell us what kind of subject you are when he's interviewing. I see the president of the Law Society is back on Uganda Law Society, so we'll go to him just immediately after Nicholas. Over to you, my brother Nicholas.
Thanks for having me. And thank you to Derek for his snap over. We mourn the passing of a legal giant. We mourn the passing of a teacher, a jurist, a politician, and a courageous lawyer. Justice Kanyeihamba, when I was still in my second year of law school. At the time, can you hear me?
Very clearly, very clearly.
Fantastic. At the time I was a lawyer, I went to the Mengo Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court, used to sit. And Justice Kanyeihamba was walking in. And of course, as young lawyers, we didn't know. We went about doing what we were doing. Get onto the steps of the Supreme Court. Many of you know that old court building in Mengo. He turned back and scolded all of us and demanded if we knew who was passing. Of course, we didn't know him. And he was quick to remind us that he was a Supreme Court judge, and we should, each time he approached. A man who liked formality. His credentials, the Honorable Justice Dr. Prof. If you didn't do that, he would scold you and remind you of his titles. He was also a very humorous fellow. His books, in fact, the humor, and how he applied humor in his legal practice. Each time you were around him, you laughed. Some of his jokes were crude. He surely was a very humorous individual. Now, I did a couple of things with Kanyeihamba, and three things come to mind. The police review exercise. Many of us don't know that after the defense review exercise that gave us the first ever defense white paper in the country and led to the creation of the UPDF, there was a similar attempt to try and review the Uganda police force. And so I was hired by donors to join a team of government officials to review the Uganda police force. And we opened up our review office at the EcoBank building on Parliamentary Avenue. And it was right next to the law firm run by Justice Kanyeihamba. I was given the mandate to run the office for a short time, and then that mandate was subsequently given to a young lawyer, Faith Maya Oneka. And at the time I ran that office, every single day I was in that office, Justice Kanyeihamba wanted to come and make his views known about the Uganda police force. He was very forceful on, summoning the entire team, which was led by the late AIGP, I forget his name now, the guy from Bushenyi, deputized by Dr. John Kamia, who is still in the police force up to now, and Mr. Nwajira, who I think is now the commandant of operations in the Uganda police force, and the former IT director, Yusuf Sewanyana. He wanted the entire team to assemble and listen to him. And so eventually we accorded him the chance to talk to the team. and we spent half a day in a lecture that was deeply enriching for that exercise. Needless to say, that exercise was abandoned before a complete review was undertaken of the Uganda police force. The second time I encountered Kanyeihamba was when I served at the Law Society under the President Sebaganyi Mukasa. I chaired two committees of the Law Society then, the Research and the Publication Committee of the Law Society. And the Law Society took the decision that judicial corruption was a very big problem in the Ugandan judiciary, and summoned an extraordinary general meeting to deal with the question of judicial corruption. Many lawyers assembled and provided evidence of corrupt judicial officers. The one who was retired, who I can now confidently mention his name, who was the subject of our discussion, was Justice Murangira. We had a long day of an EGM that was heated, but that EGM led to a resolution by the Law Society to petition Parliament for a judicial inquiry into corruption in the judiciary. A committee was put in place to take up this matter after the EGM. I think big law firms in town realized that a judicial inquiry into corruption in the judiciary would lead right into their chambers. And so they persuaded the Law Society president not to take any action on this resolution. Justice Kanyeihamba, in his quintessential self, took that resolution personally and went to Parliament to convey the decisions of the Law Society. The Law Society disowned him, and for the first time I saw him shed a tear, because having come from the bench,
Are we still on?
No, we lost him.
I think we.
created back then what was a list for lawyers to provide evidence.
You just you? Okay.
I rekindled the request for inquiry into corruption in the judiciary. In court, and the entire conversation about judicial corruption became a subject of a lawsuit.
We don't have network. We are going to be off.
Snippets of email exchange and is a area of corruption. At the time of his passing, the same problem, judicial corruption, still persists, and corruption in the judiciary. The other case directly with him before the court was the case that challenged the appointment of Justice Benjamin
But we are still
Odoki as
on. We are
Chief
still
Justice
like, don't worry.
after he had clocked the retirement age. Again, this matter was I think the EGM was petitioned, among others, by Senior Counsel Bruce Cherere and Senior Lawyer Barnabas of SNL. In a heated EGM, the Law Society agreed that appointment of judges on acting capacity after they have attained the retirement age was a violation of the Constitution. The Secretary of the Law Society and President, Senior Counsel Ruth Sebatindira was the President of the Law Society. Again,
This has ended.
You create another link.
We're still live on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen, but we've lost our audience on Twitter on account of challenges with the technology of Mr. Elon Musk. We shall certainly be raising it with Mr. Musk at our earliest opportunity. Although mine does show it's still on.
It's ended.
I don't know if anyone can still hear us. Yes, Adam, we are coming back on. Yes.
Wi-Fi is going to betray you a million times. Can't you use personal data for it?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are still going through this conversation on X with Professor Kanye about the life of Professor George Kanyeihamba. No. Can you start it? Okay, let me start it.
You start and share the link.
I'll let you know when it goes online.
What was the date of this?
YouTube or the conversation. Maybe Derek, you can be taking through our YouTube audience, and our YouTube audience, Derek, would want to know, as we are getting back on, what your take about Justice Kanyeihamba was. We are live on YouTube and TikTok. You will bear with the interruption we got from the other platform, which has been very faithful to us, but today has I think taken a minute silence in honor of Justice Kanyeihamba. So over to you, Derek.
I think says, him as a judge, you would get a feeling. Actually, when one of the things that he being an academia, he said a lawyer must be a political scientist, must be a sociologist. It's just not about the law. It's not just about the law. A lawyer must understand the context of the society. A lawyer must appreciate that law is within a certain context, not just law. And whenever I was having discussions with him, so I would be asking, for example, in that Sejusa decision, because recall that Sejusa decision, by then, is so critical because it came back later when he wanted to leave the army, or when he said that the army had retired him by not giving him assignments. And I think Sejusa won at the High Court, and then he didn't win at the Court of Appeal.
Maybe, Derek, if we could just hold you back, you're going to have a very interesting conversation on Sejusa very shortly. We're going to call you. We're going to host you back very, very shortly. You haven't sent me nothing. Look for that music. Hello? Hello? Mute yourself. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, please. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you can all hear me now. As usual, Mr. Elon Musk's program had interrupted us, and it had interrupted us at a point when I believe Mr. Opio was summarizing his point. You'll forgive us, as we keep saying every time we have these cuts from X. X is, you should bear with X. It's still working on improving its platform. Some time back, Mr. Elon Musk space crashed as he was hosting President Donald Trump. So I think it is important also for X as a platform that it has taken a moment of silence to commensurate with Justice Kanyeihamba. But if you're joining us from wherever you're joining us from, welcome to Judicial Service Conversations. We are having a break. We are having a break in our usual programming, and we are hosting a conversation about Justice Kanyeihamba. And those of us on X, we left, but those who are on YouTube and TikTok, we remained here, and we got a few snippets from Mr. Chionga about Justice Kanyehamba's internal views on the David Tinyefuza Sejusa case. And but before that, please, Nicholas, if you could wind up your point, and then we go to the Uganda Law Society and the president, Mr. Semakade.
But I believe it was together with Justice Kanyeihamba, which was the case of the reappointment of Justice Benjamin Odoki as Chief Justice when he had attained the retirement age. So that case again was a case in which the Law Society had passed a resolution to oppose the reappointment of the then Chief Justice when he had attained the retirement age. Again, the Law Society cowardized and did not want to oppose that appointment. President Ruth Sewatindira thought the matter was a very political matter, and so she didn't want to get involved. I was still secretary of the Law Society at the time. Again, we took up that case, and in that case, we went shopping for a client who would help us take that case to court. And we got the Honorable MP then, Honorable Gerard Karohanga, who agreed to be our client. He then asked me to ask Justice Kanyeihamba to join the case. He did join the case willingly and then took lead as a senior lawyer. We filed that case in court. It was one of those cases that we won without arguing because there's a lot of games being played by the people in court. Our file went missing. When the file was eventually found, Justice Kanyeihamba insisted on an investigation on what had happened to the file. When that investigation wasn't forthcoming, he then opposed the panel that had been constituted because that panel had Justice Kavuma, Justice when constituted, time led by Lady Justice Lillian Tibatemo, appeared in court, and Justice Kanyeihamba was still insisting that investigation into the way the files were handled be heard. The court at that point patience with us and simply asked the state attorney to make his submission. We won that case without arguing it, and that is the case that led to the appointment of Justice Bart Katurebe as the Chief Justice of the Republic of Uganda. It set a very important precedent in the sense that once somebody had clocked the mandatory retirement age, he or she would be unqualified to be appointed to the bench, even in acting capacity. Only age would be allowed to, because they would be qualified. Be appointed to serve on the bench. The second case we did, and that case is a case in which my good friend Ellison and brother, the case of the rebel MPs, was on a that prosecuted that case. And Justice trick was to give the Deputy Chief Justice, Justice Kavuma, some games, grant interim orders that would allow Honorable Chikubo, Honorable Nwagaba, Timire, to be kicked out of Parliament. On his instruction, gave a phone to a bodyguard to Justice Kavuma, and we were being up where he was going. And so when Justice Kavuma left the court and went to the NRM lawyers, then led by the late Chris Bakiza, who were told about the door of Justice Kavuma to physically prevent him from hearing the application for interim orders. And he was able to sit there at the old age that he was and prevent Kavuma from hearing the case and granting orders in our absence. The next thing, there was a similar plot to hear the case at 7:30 a.m. Again, we sent Kanyeihamba, who sat there, used his clout and of course his big mouth to stop the court from proceeding without hearing us until Justice Kavuma relented and heard all of us. All those cases, I learned a couple of things about Justice Kanyeihamba. He was a truly devoted who was before him. He didn't care who was blocking him. He did everything in his powers to ensure that he advocated for the rule of law. In many cases, twice in fact, in my presence, he shed tears at the injustice that the court was visiting. He dedicated his life really to defending the Constitution, a law that he took part in writing, as Derek has eloquently said. Justice Kanyeihamba was also, in many ways, he loved his task mold. Each day we did the NRM case, then the NRM Rebel MP's case. He had a large glass of bushera in the morning, and each time we went for lunch at Kampala Club, where he was a patron, and would insist we had lunch there. He had his lunch with 2 bottles of Tusker malt. So if you encountered him in the afternoon, he was a bit tipsy, and he was very stubborn in the afternoon after his lunch, because he would have had lunch with 2 bottles of Tusker malt. And then he said some of the most hilarious things in those times. One of the very lewd jokes he cracked was a joke about a white judge hearing a case of an African woman who was alleged to have killed her husband. So in the middle of hearing the Rebel MP's case, Ellison will recall this. Kanyeihamba stood up and told this joke in court. That the first witness took to the stand, and the white judge was questioning this witness about the identity of the accused person. And he said, but how did you know she was the one? He said, she was wearing a red underwear. And the judge shot back at him and said, stupid, stop lying. African women do not wear underwears. And the defense lawyer stood up and told the judge, my lord, I bow to your superiority. It was a case that left all the male lawyers on the bar in stitches, Ellison included, and myself and Galisonga, who I think is here listening, and all the lawyers were just in stitches. The only female person in that room was Justice Faith Mwanda, and there's no guessing how peeved she was. She, I think, let out a very loud jeer, and with that dramatic ending, the hearing of the day, I think, ended there. So he was a very humorous. He really was very, very funny when he met.
Nicholas, allow us to interrupt you at that point, so that we can move. No.
Stitches.
No. I certainly wasn't in stitches, but I remember quite distinctly that Your clients were also did not find the joke quite funny, as they thought they were alienating the judge. But no, why I'm limiting you, we're going to come back to you, Nicholas. I think there's a lot we can pick from what you're saying, but we want to limit everyone to just a few minutes, such that we can have a comprehensive memorial on these streets of Justice Kanyeihamba from people who worked with and knew him. We also have in our presence the Uganda Law Society president, I believe, the president of the Law Society, Mr. Isaac Semakade. I think before Isaac says anything, it's important to note that Justice Kanyeihamba was a great member of the Law Society, but also was a supporter of Mr. Semakade's bid for presidency. And I think it is also fair to say that Isaac Semakade shares, having clerked and worked at that Supreme Court, and a legal scholar in his own right, has his own experience with Justice Kanyeihamba Derek Chonga has always said that Isaac Semakade shares some traits with Justice Kanyeihamba. So I don't know, maybe Isaac, you will tell us if you share any of Justice Kanyehamba's traits. And I'm hearing from Mercy Makabai that while you may share some traits, she thinks that that there are some traits which are very unique to Isaac. So I think, Isaac, maybe we shall first open up for you, and you will please say a few words for about 5 to 10 minutes, your recollections of Justice Kanyeihamba, and then we shall go to Ivan Okuda. Over to you, Mr. President. I think Law Society, you're still muted.
Can you hear me properly?
We can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much.
I think
crack jokes, a lot of them in this time, without losing of his life and legacy. He lived simply, or maybe grandly, I don't know. Yeah, he was a larger than life figure, and that's why we're here. I first met Professor Kanyeihamba at university, like the current speaker. Unlike with Nicholas, I met Mr. Kanyeihamba, Dr. Kanyeihamba. His name and reputation preceded him. I was president of the Law Society, and therefore there was a culture for the big ticket events, Saudi Odoma Symposium, Annual Law Conference. It was considered sacrilege not to invite Justice Kanyeihamba. So he was in the first band of those to whom we offered the option of first refusal. Only if he was engaged elsewhere would we consider others. So he was the sine qua non of the ULS, of an MLS event. Then I also met him as a compulsory study through Dr. Oloka Onyango. The judgment was delivered on the 31st. 2 judgments were delivered in January or February of 2004. Petition number 1
of 2000, Constitutional Appeal number 1 of 2002, Paul Kawanga Semogere versus Attorney General, which I took on as my compulsory study under the guidelines given by. We should study a judgment from cover to cover, over and over, and reduce it in 13 pages as an analysis. So that case became foundational for me. The other judgment was appeal number 2 of 2002, which was also released in the same time. That is the famous Charles Onyango Obo and Andrew Mwenda was Attorney General. So you can imagine that was a fantastic time to be in law school. Two important judgments out off the bench, like baked bread. You know, I didn't know whether law school was, and is it a confectionery or something? So it was a fantastic time, and Justice Kanyeihamba was the lead author in the Constitutional Appeal number 1. Justice Mulenga was the lead author in Constitutional Appeal number 2 of 2002, which were all delivered in the same term in 2004. So academically, he became a North Star for me, so to speak. The case of Paul Kawanga Semogere is locus classicus for the litmus test for constitutionality of an act of parliament or regulation or any other measure. The two tests, the Oaks test, Arrow versus Oaks, and the Arrow versus Big Dragma test, are clarified therein in very simple, accessible language. Justice Kanyeihamba was quite ruthless with the Court of Appeal, Constitutional Court. In fact, that judgment ended no sense in the court. He said he warned them of adjudicating themselves into inexistence by abdicating their function to interpret the Constitution using every possible excuse they can come up with. He hoped that would be the last, and indeed that was the last time cases were dismissed, quote unquote, for lack of a cause of action in constitutional law, until this behavior crept up about 15 years later. So, Justice Kanyeihamba, for me as a young law student, I think because, like I said, it became my North Star when I was at LDC and it was time for clerkship. So many of our friends were clamoring for firms like KAA and Fumpanga and elsewhere. I knew exactly where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in his company, next to him, banging the table day by day at the Supreme Court in Mengo. When I arrived there, our supervisor was then registrar, now High Court Judge, Henrietta Olayo, and she said, well, I have 8 of you and I have only 3 judges, so I'm going to do a raffle. Unfortunately, my brother Brian Karole, who came last, got the honor of working with Justice Kanyeihamba directly with a friend of ours from Sudan. One Justice Pat Ndakatreve at the time, who later on became Chief Justice. We had a fantastic time. I had a fantastic time getting to know this genius from Buheju, genius, and yeah. But there was always Kanyeihamba. Luckily, our lead judge at the time, Justice Sekoko, permitted some kind of rotation. He allowed us to have we were able to have a sneak peek of what was going on in the Kanyeihamba chambers. As you can imagine, Brian Karole and those who worked just Kanyeihamba always had jokes at lunchtime, a lot of Kanyeihamba jokes, and that created a lot of FOMO. Not that just Barkatore can't tell jokes, Justice Kanyeihamba was in a league of his own. So many jokes I can't repeat, but one I think of the most was he had this self-deprecation. So one of the things I remember that gripped me was his revelation. He was wrong in Tamanywa, yet at the time when he was the youngest judge in the Supreme Court, he thought he was right, and all the others were wrong. So he was at the time writing the judgment called Henry Tumukunde versus Attorney General, and he wanted to use this judgment. He told us that one of the advantages of longevity is that you get to confess and apologize where you were wrong, and this would be the judgment within which he would make some confessions, including that he was wrong in Tamanywa and he was wrong perhaps in Kanyeihamba. His judgments, he had not spoken with sufficient circumspection required of a judge, and I think he used Tumukunde to make that point clear. Henry Tumukunde is a fantastic judgment with which we work together with Justice Kanyeihamba to convince the justices of the constitutional appeal to turn a 4-1 judgment into 7-0. Overturned. So that's a very, very massive. Actually, that whole term, all judgments in the Constitutional Court that came to appeal were overturned unanimously by we worked there. The judges were very kind and generous to us to allow us into their discussion. We would observe as they would have these fantastic debates and exchanges on top of what they had shared amongst themselves. My time in clerkship was very, very instructive. As you said, it allowed me to understand the value of eccentricity. We are only at our best when we are at our most natural. Justice Kanyeihamba taught us the 5 attributes of being a wonderful brain, I think. At the time he was writing his book, The Joy and Blessings of Who You Are, and he would literally walk with 3 reams of paper, writing all the thoughts. So he said it's not for him to structure the page and the chapter and everything. That's for readers and reviewers. And I think whenever the thought would come, he would write. He would write, and that's something I learned. Man, he title Joy and Blessings of You Are, and so it was really about these thoughts that he wanted to share with us, and we who were his clerkship students, we had frontline access to what this book became, and I think most of the stories people tell in town, including a perfect story about his best friend George. I think that's Justice Mulenga about Garden Path. I won't repeat that story. I just want to go to the 5 attributes Justice Kanyeihamba taught us. 1, to be clear when you speak, and to speak at all or not to write at all unless you have attained clarity. To say I have no clear thought to share at this moment. Number 2, to be frank and candid. Justice Kanyeihamba didn't like backbiting. That's not the culture or milieu in which he was raised. He had the knack and patience for looking people in the eye and tapping them by the shoulder and say, "Face me, I want to be frank and candid with you right now." Like Derek said, he would quickly, after his left off his chest, turn to the most in a man. Thirdly, to be thorough in your work, to be thorough in your work, which you have assumed voluntarily. Paid or unpaid. As the Mingo, we were quite struggling with finances. Justice Kanyeihamba was the head of the FINCO, Finance Committee. So a lot of concerns, as you can imagine, were brought before him. He was a Pilato between us, clerks, everybody competing for the small petty cash that was there. He was in charge of that, and he created that atmosphere where people really worked, whether funds were there or the judiciary has excessive funds at its disposal. I don't see the thoroughness. What taught us to be fair and just. To be fair before those who, respect those who are before you, those and just to those who are not before you. Lastly, I think that's the one. I spent about 2 years at the Supreme Court, and then I left for some time until I heard that he had returned to the bar and working on some of those cases Nicholas was talking about, that we had filed a case against the bar. And someone that is me and my brother, his then partner, Eruno Emmanuel. He had photocopied our pleading from court. He had it at his desk and he had some things to say. With that conversation, I think I summarized it into 2 words in pleading. He told us we had very few lawyers of our caliber and we should not plead expansively. We should have thin pleadings, notes of motion that 1 page, so that we can file as many as 70 pleadings a week, 1,000 a year, and resolve them and push them through the system. So he took us across the world where this has been done and so on and so forth. But this is a man really who wanted time to count. I guess Kanyeihamba lived the lifetimes of so many people. Each day he lived. I mean, and I think that's what he was trying to help us understand. He tried to help us. I think I now realize that he was warning us about the mortality of our own mortality. He was aware of his own mortality, and so he wanted to see much more of that kind of good work. So on and so forth. I thank Mr. Runo for guidance. He shared with us all his judges. Judges may think, of course, this is a short case, let me hear it. It's until you start speaking, putting your submissions, that's when you realize, oh my God, what did I get involved in? But it's good for the mind. That's the trick from the bench. Like from the bench, listed and so on and so forth. The thick pleading, not so much. That's a trick for you young attorneys who are starting your careers against it. Would be unfair to just Kanyeihamba if I did not of his intellectuals. The first one that I knew to be his very good friend was Professor Jendera. I don't know if I pronounced that properly. Known as Jessica Jendera Kwesiga, who was formerly Center for Adult and Distance Learning at Makerere University, what we call CCE. Later on, I really first met Professor Jessica Kwesiga. Was now deep into civil society. The NIVA is the initial stand for the about indigenous voluntary associations, development network voluntary associations. Those of us who went to LDC, was the LDC's immediate neighbor. When you come out of the gate, you saw the neighbor. I don't know. So he was the executive director at the time. I was also embarked on leadership of the Legal Brains Trust, and he took me to I was introduced to Professor Jesse Kwesiga by Miss Irene of Ojida, the CEO at FIDA, who are the CEO of Breakfast. Jesse liked me, took me to his solo to teach me something about how to teach villagers good governance and constitutional law. I thought I had called him a liar. I told us, how can you teach this difficult constitutional law concept to villagers? He said, you come and we do it together. So I turned out to be a believer. During that 1 week, he asked me about my background and he discovered that I was very much influenced by Justice Kanyeihamba. He picked his phone call, called him and abused him in my face for over 30 minutes. Apparently, Justice Kanyeihamba was also abusing Professor Kwesiga in 30 minutes. In those 30 minutes, it was such hostile way of having comrade grounding. I have not seen something. I am quite a hard guy myself. I haven't seen anything that naked before. And it was happening in multiple languages, mostly Ruchiga. I could pick something. A translation was done for me by Professor Kwesiga in the most polished manner he could for his. He said Kanyeihamba done much damage. But it went like this. Dr. Kwesiga called Professor Kanyeihamba to blame him for deceiving young people like me, that he is the big star. Kwesiga wanted me to hear that Kanyeihamba was actually his potential. I went into academia, you followed me, you copied me. Now you found yourself a gun. You know you must. I told him that, of course, can you tell you should also reveal young man that you are mature. You are mature. You are fluke or something like that. And went on and on and on. But the two of them had been best friends. I think they managed to achieve the height of academia because they had each other to support each other and to the height of academia. Professor Kwesiga died in March 2025 this year. And the moment Professor Kwesiga died, I knew that my brother, my mentor won't hold on much longer because his contemporary, his backbone, his North Star was also perhaps gone. We could continue to help him through our friends, but it was all gone. So Professor Jesse Kwesiga is the beloved husband of Professor Joy Kwesiga, who may be well known in gender studies. She was the dean or director or principal of the faculty of the School of Gender at McLean University. She's also one of the founders of ACFORD. So these people really helped me understand civil society. As you can see, I cannot be unfair if I leave out Dr. James Kanyeihamba and his brother Professor Muhanga, who also took me on and me into what I do, gave me that that Professor Kanyeihamba. So, plus of course, Chief Kagaba, who has very funny stories about his triziness, one of which is the everlasting awe to which they hold his father. That's a very good story. I think Chief Kagaba's father was alive at the time of raising the Uganda flag, putting down the Union Jack and raising the Uganda flag. The soldiers who raised the Uganda flag, but the Wachina don't agree that anybody else did it except Egypt's dad. This line about the head. But yeah, I was really introduced into this community. I'm very, very grateful. I feel my condolences to them. I would be unfair if I didn't note the importance of the Kanyeihamba Foundation and the colleagues who are really the best source of comrade. especially Mr. Norman Tumuhimbise, Chief Digitalk, Professor Kanyeihamba, patron for Digitalk. Professor Kanyeihamba wanted to be so active. He wanted to bring his knowledge, information to the young people. Professor Kanyeihamba was encyclopedic in his comradeship. He wanted you to know something about your country. He knows, I think, because of the world education, he had a sense of the treasured history. So I want to close, Mr. Hilton, if you permit me.
Please.
From his magnum opus, Constitutional and Political History of Uganda, from 1894 to present. That book was first published in 2002 and republished by Law Africa in 2010. I want to read from 1 to 155 or 8 thereabout of that publication, largely because we're a younger nation. Most of people in this space don't know this history and haven't bought this book. Constitutional and Political History of Uganda from 1894 to present. Yes, Kanyeihamba was really, very strong on this point that if we don't know our history, mistakes shall be repeated, and so on and so forth.
Okay, Mr. President.
Ugandans, please buy the book. Buy this book if you really care about just Kanyeihamba.
Yes.
Buy this book. It was dedicated to all his friends.
Mr. President, could you give us the title again?
Advice. Yes.
Give us the title again.
Yes, I beg your pardon.
We didn't get the title. Could you give us the title? And then you could also read for us so that we could move to Mr. Okud as well. But the title, I think some people here had lost the title.
And Political History of Uganda. Constitutional and Political History of Uganda from 1894 to present. It is dedicated with love and gratitude to his dear wife Susan, his children Sarah Kwezi, Matiko, Ruth Katunji Kanyeihamba, and his daughter-in-law Catherine Katera, with abundant love, extreme tolerance, and deep understanding sustained him throughout his adult life. It is also dedicated to his beloved parents, Zakaria Barora and Mariamu Chenda, and his brothers and sisters, especially Frida Baremire and the late Charles Nambeki, all of whose love, work ethics, honesty, integrity, and humanity he endeavored to encourage. I've already talked about you, Ugandans, his many friends who he loved a lot, especially those who were good, true, with whom companionship, advice, understanding have been invaluable for his existence and well-being. Straight away, I will go to my favorite passage in this book. It's at page 51, as I said, and the title is called Confrontation at Mwanza. Anyone knows this passage?
I think
you will have your comments when I've been, but it starts confrontation at Mwanza.
I think we are losing you a bit.
Young people stands for Uganda National Liberation Front. That was the political initiative that arose out of the Montreal Conference. After only 3 months allowing the UNAF to run the affairs of Uganda, the Tanzanian government decided to show Dule, Professor Yusuf Dule, the limitations of his powers. The shortest of all notices of all times given between governments of sovereign states, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere informed Lule that Lule, there's an interference. Is it coming from Adam or somewhere else? Hello?
I think you continue reading. We can hear. We can hear. But Mr. President, I'm going to request that you only read one page of it and then you hold the other page so that we hear from someone and come back to you, because we don't want you to, where are you saying you're concluding, we want to come back to you again. So please don't read everything. If you could just read for us that page and then, and if you could just start it again. If you could just start it again. Yeah. he would disagree with me entirely. We can hear you. Please read. Although you keep breaking.
Of all times, given governments of sovereign states, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere informed Lule that Lule, should go with his cabinet to Mwanza in northern Tanzania and meet the Tanzanian cabinet for a short exchange of views on the progress so far made by the UNLF. Nyerere himself named the portfolios of ministers, the holders of which he wanted to accompany Lule to that meeting. Most holders of these portfolios came from the first and second groups of ministers described earlier in this chapter. Most, if not all, were hostile to Lule and his close associates. President Lule noticed this phenomenon. However, instead of consulting cabinet or close associates about the invitation and his entourage, Lule appeared to have consulted one or two officials in State House and then made a decision which turned out to be disastrous for him and his administration. He first decided to reshuffle cabinet and change many of the holders of the portfolios identified by Nyerere. Several of these had been the personal choices of Milton Obote. The new team to accompany Lule would not be exclusively what Nyerere and Obote wanted. It included ministers and officials from the third and fourth groups of people who were running the UNLF. One of the ministers who was reshuffled was Paulo Mwanga. Initially being the Minister of Internal Affairs at the instance of Obote, he was dropped in the reshuffle. However, learning of his place, Paulo Mwanga was simply and having it and humility. Those are words that I remember in this passage. Using his big and humility, which are characteristic of many Ugandan politicians, Mwanga was reappointed immediately as Minister of Labour. However, Mwanga's former portfolio was now given to Dr. Andrew Kayiira. Mr. Ejalu, who had been Minister of Information, had been invited to Mwanza, was reshuffled and made Minister of Regional Cooperation. Grace Iringira was appointed as Minister of Information. Before the reshuffle, Professor Dan Naudere had been Minister of Justice. After the reshuffle, Dr. G.W. Kanyeihamba, who had been Attorney General, was appointed to hold both portfolios and became Minister of Justice and Attorney General. There were other changes. The changes were made without Lule first consulting Nyerere or Obote, who had had a hand in the making of the first cabinet. They were exceedingly annoyed, it seems. However, Nyerere was not to be defeated. He appeared to have persuaded Lule to agree that despite the reshuffle, the ministers who had previously occupied those portfolios should also accompany Lule to Mwanza. Mwalimu, an astute and seasoned politician, had been at the helm of national and international politics since the 1950s. And in this kind of politics, Lule was a mere infant of less than 3 months. It was obvious who would win every round of confrontation between them. On 9th June 1979, ministers were telephoned individually by the principal secretary and informed that they were wanted at Entebbe Airport to accompany the president to Tanzania for a working lunch at Mwanza. Most of us did not know who else was going and why. At Mwanza Lakeside, the Uganda visitors were met by a multitude of people. The cabinet, the army, the police, and national and regional leaders. The Tanzanians serving in Uganda with UNLF and welcoming dancers, including snake charmers, were all there. This was at about 12:30 p.m. Instead of going into the expected meeting for lunch, we ministers and other officials were led instead to Mwanza Hotel. One Lule was taken to Mwanza State Lodge. In the hotel, we were individually taken to a single room where a bed had been prepared, a towel, soap, toothpaste, and toothbrush placed. All this generosity appeared strange, considering that we had been told we would only be there for a couple of hours at most. We were served an excellent lunch and waited for further developments. At about 4 p.m., we were collected from the hotel and taken by coaches to a nearby secondary school building, where we were later joined by the Tanzanian government. We all sat there and waited without anyone uttering a word. The Tanzanian government sat on one side, and the UNLF administration sat opposite them with its leader, Yusuf Lule. It was about 4 p.m. when our chief host, President Nyerere, drove in. We all stood up. I didn't notice whether our own President Yusuf Lule stood up as well. We were all signaled to sit down, which we did. For the next 5 minutes or so, nothing was said. The silence was unbearable. One could have dropped the needle and it would have been loudly heard. Then Nyerere spoke. His message may be paraphrased as follows. President Lule and your ministers, you're welcome. I hope you had a nice rest after lunch. We have come to sort out a few things. The war with Amin is not yet over. We hear that his troops may still be in the northern parts of your country. We must continue. We must resolve the presence of your most important exile here, Milton Obote. Tanzanian wananchi are asking me that, Mwalimu, we have liberated Uganda. Why is Obote still here? You'll be meeting him after this meeting. Then there is the question of payment. Tanzania sacrificed so much equipment, property, and blood in liberating you. There is talk of compensation, but also, how is our continued presence in Uganda? How is it to be paid for? These matters must be resolved before you return to Entebbe. Lule was asked not to say anything. No one else spoke. Nyerere closed the meeting with his words. We shall meet again at 8 p.m. at the State Lodge. Remember, they're in the secondary school. And that site Kanyeihamba talks about later. Most of us Ugandans at the meeting, perhaps with the exception of those who knew what it was all about, were speechless. None of us had closed our offices or informed those in our residences that we would be staying the night out. There was curfew at Entebbe. No aeroplanes could land or take off after 6 p.m. As we closed the meeting, it was after 6 p.m. There was no way we were going to leave Mwanza that night. This explained the presence of newly acquired personal effects of towels, toothbrushes, and soap at Mwanza Hotel. At 8 p.m., the Ugandan delegation with its leader, President Lule, were in the state lodge, seated. Shortly afterwards, Nyerere, by Obote, came in, sat at the front facing the Ugandans. Greetings were exchanged. For the first time since one tried to remove the other from office by parliamentary means, the other detained, the other under emergency powers, Ivinjira met Obote face to face. They exchanged greetings as if nothing had ever happened. After the exchange of greetings all around, we all resumed our seats. There was a radio cassette in the middle of the room near Mwalimu Nyerere. And as if on cue, he switched it on. It broadcast loudly and clearly the following. This is the BBC World News. In Uganda, there is a political crisis. The new government under Professor Lule is facing acute political problems. As we broadcast, we understand that Lule and his ministers have got Tanzania to meet the country's president, who may have the solution. Nyerere then switched off the radio and addressed us. There you have it, gentlemen. We have a serious crisis in Uganda. The whole world knows now. Frankly, when Uganda's president were baffled by this news, until that very moment, we didn't know we had a crisis in our country. We had not discussed anything resembling a crisis since coming into government. It was a curtain raiser for what was to transpire. Subsequently, Mwalimu Nyerere then asked whether anyone had anything to say about the crisis. Paul Mwanga, who had only a short time ago been kneeling and appealing to President Lule not to drop him from cabinet, but to be given something small so that he remains active, since as a sick old man, he might die quickly if he remains idle, was the first one to drop a bombshell. He accused Lule of being the worst dictator Africa. According to Paulo Mwanga, UNLF constitution and all the rules agreed to by everyone at Moshi was not consulting anyone and was ignoring the fighters who had put him in power. His opinion, Lule could not recover from the ravages of Amin's regime if Lule remained president. Uganda could not recover from the ravages of Amin's regime if Lule remained president of Uganda. To speak was Minister Ejalu, who started his contribution by disclosing that Uganda was waiting anxiously to welcome its president, Nyerere. That Ugandans consider themselves very fortunate in having three presidents, namely their beloved Mwalimu Nyerere, President Milton Obote, and then President Lule, in that order. And it will be a great day of celebrations if the three presidents were to stand side by side soon in Uganda. He then criticized Lule for ignoring the Moshi spirit and the National Consultative Council, which was, after all, the supreme organ of the UNLF. Ejalu did not spare Milton Obote, whom he accused of trying to sabotage the UNLF and kill Ejalu himself. Yoweri Museveni gave what I considered an impartial and reconciliatory speech, stating that he had warned President Lule not to ignore the NCC and to consult all the forces which had created the UNLF. Museveni expressed the belief that the differences which had occurred within the UNLF could easily be solved if everyone listened to common sense, and he didn't see any crisis as reported on the BBC. Dr. Bisase and Chris Ivinjira spoke eloquently in support of Lule and his government. They dismissed the accusations that Lule was a dictator or did not consult others before making decisions. As Minister of Justice and Attorney General, I was next asked to comment. I identified the main problem as being structural and constitutional. Liberation groups were at Moshi and created a front with organs and adopted rules of conduct, because at the time we thought we would continue fighting for some time before Amin could be defeated or removed. The structures and organs were designed for a guerrilla front outside Uganda and not a government inside Uganda. However, Amin had fallen more quickly and sooner than we had expected, 2 weeks only after the end of the Monterey Conference. Consequently, we were into government. The radicals, consequently, went into government. The radicals and NCC insisted that we should govern the country under the UNFL Constitution and rules. But others, including Professor Rule, argued that now we are in charge of Uganda as a country. We have to be governed by the Uganda Constitution and not by rules intended to govern us while we were still a liberation front in exile. Nyerere listened attentively. Most Ugandans heard me in silence, but nods of approval here and there. Nyerere thought I was diverting the audience from his mission. He stopped me in mid-sentence and asked, "Are you not a lawyer?" When I said yes, he continued, "These problems are political, not legal." Next, I spoke for and against relay. As it was getting late in the night, our host adjourned the meeting for the following day for 2:30 p.m. On adjournment, President Ray consulted some of us, and we resolved that whatever happened, the following day we would inform Nyerere. We would go home that day. In the morning, we discovered that a number of proposals would be discussed that afternoon, and some of the discussions would involve the heads of delegations. The proposals included, number one, the acceptance of Obote into the UNLF government as vice president, payment of monies in compensation, and for the upkeep of the Tanzanian forces in Uganda. There were other demands from the side. What most of the demands and proposals were acceptable to the Ugandan delegation? Those which involve expenditure, verification and assessment, as well as budgeting for. The demand that Obote done had served the UNLF government before the expiry of the 2 years was rejected by the overwhelming majority of the Ugandan delegation. The afternoon discussions continued more or less on these proposals and demands. As talks progressed, it became increasingly clear that the Tanzanians had no intention of releasing us until we had agreed to all their terms. During these talks, President Rule revealed that the Uganda president and ministers had decided to go home that afternoon in time to beat the Entebbe airport curfew. Both Nyerere and Obote were obviously angry and upset by this development. We felt that if Nyerere had not feared some international criticism, he might have decided to detain us at Mwanza until we had agreed to his demands. The interrogation before Nyerere and Obote the previous evening had left most of us feeling so inadequate and as a puppet government. Indeed, at times during the discussion, some of us felt as if we had been naughty school children who had been taken to the headmaster and his deputy for telling off and correction. When we insisted that we would be leaving Mwanza that afternoon and we left the state lodge, Nyerere with a heavy hand from Mwanza airstrip, as if after we left our to Lule and said, "Lule, go and discuss these matters with your people and report the results to me next Friday." Not here this time, but in Dar es Salaam. After consultations, Lule found that the hostility towards Obote and his immediate return to Uganda as a senior minister in the UNLF was very strong. As narrated the following week, President Lule went and reported the results of his consultations to Nyerere, and the consequences of that report became history. Thereafter, Nyerere conspired and cooperated with Lule's opponents within the UNLF to remove Lule from office. Different versions of the dramatic events leading to the eventual removal of Lule from office have been told. This book was partly narrated by Lule's principal personal secretary, the late James Sendabulia, and by President Lule himself when he returned to the UK by Dar es Salaam, where he had been detained by the Tanzanian authorities against his will. Removal of Victor Lule from the presidency.
I think, Mr. President.
Following Lule's report that Ugandans were not willing to accept all the Tanzanian proposals disclosed at the Mwanza encounter, Nyerere clandestinely called some Ugandan leaders who were opposed to the consultation. These leaders were mainly UPCs in the UNLF. The meeting with Nyerere was in secret. It was at that meeting that a conspiracy to remove Lule from office was hatched out, and methods of doing so were finalized. The conspiracy was to pass a vote of no confidence of the UNLF, remove him from office as president of Uganda. The motion and the reasons for removing Lule were discussed and rehearsed in Tanzania. On 19th June, the conspirators met a dozen or so members of the National Consultative Council, NCC, whom they knew to be against Lule continuing to rule Uganda. It was agreed that the NCC or any other UNLF business would be suspended so that the conspirators and those they had persuaded to join them, the members of the NCC could consult with the president on some issue of national importance. When the conspirators and their newly converted colleagues entered State House at Entebbe, the Tanzanian security forces sealed all entrances to State House. Incidentally, in order to make the vote of no confidence appear democratic, the conspirators had invited several members of the NCC. The president was invited to join the group in one of the rooms in State House, and one of the conspirators produced the draft resolution of a vote of no confidence in the chairman of the UNLF and announced that the meeting would be called to order as a special session of the NCC to debate the motion. The chairman of the NCC was present to preside over the special session. Let it be said from here that whereas there was nothing wrong with a few members of the NCC in the meeting and it was unconstitutional, both according to the UNLF Constitution and that of Uganda, to call a special session of the NCC or to debate the motion of a vote of no confidence. Calling of meetings of the NCC required the giving and publishing of notices for specific periods of time to all members. Secondly, the UNLF was to have held office for only and organize elections. The delegates at Mochi had outlawed any votes of no confidence in the leadership of the front, which they feared would be diversionary regarding the tight schedule the government had to fulfill before the general elections. In May, the meeting was held with the president virtually under house arrest. Efforts by other ministers and ACC members to go to Entebbe and participate in the debate were frustrated by the Tanzanian security forces. Sometime during the meeting at State House, the president had the opportunity to telephone the Attorney General and appraise him of the developments at State House. After being reassured by the president that the Tanzanians were impartial in the matter, the Attorney General, who had by then consulted the then Chief Justice S.W.W. Wambusi, advised the president not to attend the meeting and to ignore any resolutions passed at that meeting, as anyone wishing to implement
Finish the book.
In retrospect, the Attorney General should have heeded the earlier words of President Nyerere that these matters were political and not legal. He was forced to attend the rest of the meeting where apparently he offered no solution. The vote of no confidence was passed. Through the president's principal private secretary, Attorney General advised Lule to resign the presidency. However, within a short time, the conspirators found a number of candidates willing to replace Yusuf Lule, and eventually Godfrey Kanyeihamba emerged as their final choice. He was thrown in before Lule resigned. For some 48 hours, Uganda had no president in office. Contrary to what Nyerere had told Lule, Tanzania immediately announced to the whole world that Tanzania was recognizing the new government of Kanyeihamba as the new president, since Lule had been democratically removed by resolution of the FCC, the Supreme Legislative Body of Uganda. When Lule resisted from resigning, Nyerere ordered his removal from the State House by force, and President Lule was taken to Dar es Salaam apparently to consult with Nyerere. But actually, the plan was to remove him from the State House so that Kanyeihamba could establish some kind of legitimacy by occupying it himself. Although Nyerere persisted in telling the world that Lule had gone to Dar es Salaam voluntarily, the truth of the matter was that Lule had been taken and kept there against his will. Apparently, while there, the Tanzanian high authorities again and again asked Lule to put a statement that he had accepted changes which had taken place democratically in Uganda. According to James President Lule, the departure of Lule from Dar es Salaam was carefully planned by him and Senabulia by way of a trick. Since Nyerere was still putting out a statement that Lule was in Dar es Salaam voluntarily, Lule used that knowledge to escape. He sent Senabulia to the British Airways booking office in Dar es Salaam, who secretly booked 2 one-way tickets to London, UK, and then secretly communicated with a reporter of the BBC that Lule had decided to leave Tanzania and rejoin his family in the UK. The BBC flashed the news to the international press, and it was broadcast worldwide. Nyerere had, for a change, been beaten at his own game. The end of Lule is footnoted by A.B.K. Kasozi as follows. Lule's press conference, in which he blamed Tanzania, did not improve his image as a naive politician, or as one of his former colleagues at Makere put it, a reluctant politician. He did not fully comprehend the dynamics of the prevailing political forces. His involvement in the struggle against Obote in the period 1980 to 84 taught him a lot. By 1981, he had grasped the nature of political forces in Uganda to such an extent that he knew exactly how to coordinate a resistance struggle at the head of a organized fighting movement. That ended one of the briefest but most dramatic rules of Uganda. What followed thereafter is the subject of the next chapter. I am sorry for having taken you through all this, but if you visited Professor Kanyeihamba even once in your life, you would have had a passage of this length read to you. Not exactly this one, but whatever he felt was inspired in that moment. I felt this was inspired in this moment to, share with you the Kanyeihamba experience. Many lessons you may take from here. Most of you who are lawyers, just Kanyeihamba talks about it this himself. That perhaps Nyerere had taught him the best political lesson of his life. I stop there. Thank you. May his soul rest in eternal peace.
Thank you, Mr. President. May his soul indeed rest in eternal peace. We've heard, of course, about many things there. The removal of the removal of President Lule, and of course the advice of President Nyerere on the role of lawyers. We also had, I think we're having just some small little technical difficulty, but we have I think Mr. Ivan Okuda, famously known in some circles as a man from Katakwi. But as we're trying to get Ivan back on, I think Ivan will come back on. I think Ivan will come back on. As we're trying to get Ivan back on, allow me to turn back to Derek. Derek Chionga. Derek, you're going to give us your closing remarks. It's now 9 o'clock. We've had a lengthy passage read from a book written by Professor Kanyeihamba, which was constitutional. And I think the title of the book was Constitutional Political History of Uganda by Professor George Wilson Kanyeihamba. And the president of the Law Society has read for us a passage in the reminiscent style of Professor Kanyeihamba. Now, you'll recall, as Derek was ending, he had told us that Professor Kanyeihamba and Mr. Semaka, they share a lot of traits, and certainly the reading of long texts is definitely one of them. But Derek, if you're to tell us about Kanyeihamba, Professor Kanyeihamba, if you're to sum up Kanyeihamba the man, you gave us a brief synopsis of Kanyeihamba, what he had gone through, where he was born, how he grew up. Nicholas Opio has given us the Kanyeihamba the practitioner, Kanyeihamba the humorist. He has shown us about Kanyeihamba the bold man who took on a law society, and the man who at heart and at his core was a man of justice and cried occasionally for justice. Derek, you spent a lot of time, and everyone knows that you spent a lot of time with Professor Kanyeihamba. In fact, in many legal circles, some people used to think that Mr. Chionga was the son of Professor Kanyeihamba. So, if you could just, I've heard it said myself, so if you could just give us Kanyeihamba the man, what is there about Kanyeihamba the man? Some people saw Kanyeihamba on TV, people read Kanyehamba's judgments, people read Kanyehamba's books. There was that famous story of the road where the city council named the road the Honorable Justice Dr. George Wilson Kanyeihamba, PhD, LLM, BAR, LLD, that Buziga Road. What kind of man was Professor Kanyeihamba, apart from being a historical chronicler of the collapse of Lule and of the idea? I think the president telling the Attorney General that, who has brought you here, these matters are legal, not political. Derek, you need not fear. These matters are not necessarily legal. Although you're speaking to lawyers, we shall not have the hospitality of Julius Nyerere. So please, if you could give us your view.
As a man, you got to understand you, and you're in sync. He would have your back. He was really a very principled, loving person, even in private life. As long as you understand him. If you don't understand him, and he doesn't understand, he could be very, very assertive. And if you don't understand him, you would be in trouble. But if you understand him, you appreciate each other. I think even when you don't agree, because for him, not agreeing was always on the table. With whoever you could be, not agreeing was always on the table. 1 minute you are agreeing, next you are arguing, that's fine. But the bottom line, he was really, really, really very loving, and that's one thing that I came to appreciate about him. And you call him. I remember one time around 2019, there was a news came through that he had died. So I had taken long without, it was fake news, but I had taken long without calling him. So I immediately went to my phone. I think I had returned from Arua from a long trip. So I called him. I said, Derek, I'm still alive, they are lying. So come and see me, it has been long. So I go and I meet him. But for me, he was really, really a loving person and he would have your back. And he would have your back, whatever the circumstances. And he hated cowards. So I don't like cowards. He was a fighter. I hate cowards. Whatever situation, this does not work, the other works. And really, his life is reflected in these legal fights. I'm sure even in court, there are still many battles of his that he has left, even when he was sick in whatever circumstances. Like there is a lawyer who is in prison because of... So he's a fighter. Be it private, be it public, for him, the fight was his life. He liked a fight. There is no doubt about that. If you never liked a fight, you don't go near Kanyeihamba. You go to him, he's giving you documents. Whether he has given you these documents, the other week, he will furnish them again this week to show you. He always had a point to prove. That was him. And you had to understand that. And he would repeat and repeat and repeat a point over and over again. And he had this belief that he could go up to 100. He could go up to 100. Because I recall there was a time when they were questioning his memory. He told me how my memory is really, really sharp. I've talked to doctors. They've assured me I can go up to 100. So he could show you that his memory is still up to it. There was still that conviction in him that he could go on and on and on and on, that he still had energy. So bottom line for me, he was a fighter in public and private. He was this fighter. And in a way, my career in journalism, it really had, there are many stories that I did, and they are as a result of Kanyeihamba, and inspiration of this, that you have to fight. You have to fight. You have to fight on. Yeah, that's how I would like to remember him.
And Derek, just before we go to Nicholas, you will, in your parting remarks, what would you consider to be the greatest contributions? Not one, but what you think in the milestone career of Kanyeihamba. Yeah. I mean, we've just had, he's a fighter. We've heard from Isaac how he, that whole being a North Star for people's careers and the sort of jurisprudence he produced. As a person who doesn't read for law exams or doesn't write out submissions or prepare lengthy cross-examinations, as a member, as the eyes of the public, as the what you would call the intercessor between the courts and the public, the person who takes the message from the legal fraternity to the public, as a journalist who has not just covered Kanyeihamba but who has covered courts, what do you think is the lasting legacy of Kanyeihamba, and also of that, because especially he was in various institutions. Of those institutions he was in, the CA, the law school, the establishment of a law school, the CA, the Wodoki-led Supreme Court. What would you consider to be what would you consider to be, in your view, as your closing remarks, before we take one or two questions from people, what would you consider to be the highlights of his career at the different stages, and in those stages, what would you consider to be Kanyeihamba's lasting contribution to the Republic of Uganda?
I think, first of all, like I said, setting up law school. I don't know how that will be documented, but him and Professor Kapoza setting up law school, for me, first of all, stands out. And that's one. If I'm just to count them, I will eventually come to one thing for me, that materially doesn't stand. But materially, starting law school stands out. Then secondly, his belief in writing. He has documented his life. He has written law. He has his belief in writing. He kept on, even when he retired, he would just keep on writing these many books. You just have to get any book. Kanyeihamba has written many things. He would even repeat them. He reached the point of just repeating, what he had written earlier. His belief in storing information, documenting it. So it's easier when, for example, even when, for me, I knew it would be easy to write, an obituary about him. But information is all around about him. He has not, left anything in secret. It's in books. Then his belief in rule of law. And even when the courts were unjust, in his view, his belief that it's still the courts, that's where the solution is. Time and again, even when he cried, there is when he was stopped from filing a case. There was when he was stopped from filing a case. I think that was a Justice Kavuma thing, challenging him becoming Deputy CJ, Deputy Chief Justice. He cried. And what he did was to go to the Supreme Court and file the case there. And every lawyer knows you can't do that. But he went and filed the case there. So that was him. The court was where to settle things. And he will tell you, we are going to fight and fight and fight, and we are fighting in court. And also, there is this belief that he had in young people. He really liked working with young people, Professor. He would shout at them, bark at them, but still he liked working with young people. And that's how we came to work with him. Because if he never believed in working with young people, probably we would not have worked with him. Just say that these are young people and they are not up to it. He really liked working with young people. So, and for him, timekeeping was critical. You don't show up at his gate. He tells you come at 10. You don't show up 30 minutes later. He will chase you. So you had to keep time. He would be up, even when he was domiciled at home, he wouldn't move, but he would be up waiting for you. At 10, he would be expecting you in. You are not there, he's receiving other visitors. You come next time. Come next time. The idea of keeping time is whoever dealt with him would know. You had to keep time. You had to keep time. You don't mess around with the time. And he was an extremely generous person. So that's how I would like to remember Professor Kanyeihamba. I don't know, besides these achievements that people talk about, that we talk about materially, the fight that the president has talked about, I talked about it briefly. That was a highlight. That was the highlight of nationalism, what he did. His belief in Uganda as a country, you see it in there. His belief in government, his belief in the independence of our country, you see it in there. That he never believed that any other person should come here and order around the president of this country, even if you are Mwalimu Nyerere. So when you read that, I had talked about it briefly. Yes, it's a very big highlight, and I understand why when you read it, it has many implications in how he understood statecraft and how the spirit he had for this country, defending this country, even when Mwalimu Nyerere was basically posing around, because he had aided in eliminating Amin. Now he was some sort of big brother who had to summon the president and do whatever he had to do with our government. So his nationalism is exhibited in what the president has read. Thank you very much. And the issue about the barrier arrangements, they are not yet out. They are still doing consultations, internal consultations with the family, and some of it is sensitive. So, but I think as soon as they are ready, they will be giving them out. They are still doing with the government and even internally within the family, because the children are in the UK. I don't know if they've landed in the country, so they are still doing internal consultations.
Thank you very much, Derek, for that. I think some of the things I pick, because I think they said to, it was one thing, what would you say? But having spent so much time under him and with him, I can imagine there's just like so much that you would say. But I pick some of them having pioneered the start of law school here, meaning that if it wasn't for him, probably we wouldn't have had that chance, or maybe, I don't know. His belief in writing, and I think several other people have also mentioned that bit, and also in the books that he has written. So maybe it's a challenge to us as well to not only stop at writing, preparing whatever it is we do, but to store our thoughts, to write, so that a bit of us is left, as we also are challenged to live. I think last time we had a guest here who told us that we should be, don't just leave a legacy of having drafted the best plaint. And then it also brings me here to what he said, that you should at least raise some dust. Don't just go through life silent, raise some dust. Let somebody say that you passed here. And then his belief in the rule of law, etc. So we want to appreciate you so much for the insights. And of course, we're going to ask, just in case there's somebody who is listening in and they would want to pay their last respects. You've heard that is not yet out. It's information that is still being processed, and you'll be able to know from the same channels, probably on Mr. Karuhanga's X Space, and definitely also on the papers. You will get to know, so stay tuned. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much for that. I think that is, I think, a fascinating set of things. Kanyeihamba the fighter, Kanyeihamba the builder of a legacy of the Makerere Law School, Kanyeihamba a writer, Kanyeihamba a timekeeper, and Kanyeihamba an anti-imperialist, and imperialism from whichever corner. And I think, but also an understanding of statecraft. I think one of the passages, I think the last sentence of the passage that Isaac Semakade, president of the Law Society, read was, thus ended one of the briefest but most dramatic rules of Uganda. What followed thereafter is the subject of the next chapter. And I think while Kanyeihamba's life cannot be brief, I think the contribution he has made, what will follow thereafter, will certainly be the subject of the next chapter. But maybe Mercy can throw a question towards Nicholas, because she's been dying to ask Nicholas something. And I don't know why, but Nicholas will have to explain to us. Nicholas will have to explain to us particularly why Mercy has been dying to throw a question at him. But let's first hear the question, then we shall see.
Ellison, that statement is quite deceptive, but I think it's because of that joke that Justice Kanyeihamba gave in court about the white judge. I think I want to hear more of those jokes. They're quite interesting.
No, I think those jokes, you can hear them with Nicholas in your private time, but let's...
Nicholas, thank you very much. I think it's very interesting for a younger lawyer like myself to get the hilarious side of some of these very serious judges that we didn't have the opportunity to interact with directly. For many of the younger lawyers listening, they would like to know your opinion on what you think is the enduring the enduring legacy of Justice Kanyeihamba on the constitutional landscape of Uganda. I mean, we've had this very beautiful passage. For many people who don't have a very good understanding of the history of Uganda, they're probably lost in between. If you could summarize it in maybe a minute or two, what would you label his legacy as on the constitutional landscape of Uganda? And what should the future generations of Uganda, the lawyers, the judges, the people in the general public, pick from his legacy and implement and interpret moving forward in their lives to have, also raise some dust in their lifetime? Thank you.
And a wonderful, fantastic young lawyer. So is Alfred.
Just for the avoidance of doubt.
For the avoidance of doubt. Thank you for your question. I think that few people can lay the claim for having fought for Uganda's liberation. Justice Kanyeihamba was one of the NRA people in exile mobilizing support for the NRA liberation war. Justice Kanyeihamba became a politician as a minister for commerce. Justice Kanyeihamba was a legislator. He wrote the constitution. Large parts of the constitution of the Republic of Uganda really was written by the legal and the legal affairs committee that was headed by Kanyeihamba and had people like Ben Wacha, Wandera Ogalo. And so he was really instrumental in framing this order. I think that's why he felt so dearly in love with that constitution and defended that with all his life. Justice Kanyeihamba was opposed when he was appointed to the bench. And you have to read his book, and my President Samaka of the passages. But you have to read the story about his appointment to the Supreme Court, which was opposed. He was actually sent to the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and he called Jotham Tumesije, who then did the lobbying and got him appointed to the bench. And many people thought that he was a cadre judge. And these days we hear about cadre judges, but he went to the bench and distinguished himself really as a jurist, as somebody who was a stickler to the law. And upset many of his friends, including President Museveni, with some of his decisions. He retired, left the bench, and came back to the bar and litigated some of the most important cases. I mentioned the Chief Justice that we did with him. He led the team on the challenge of NRM rebel MPs. So really, for me, he was a life that was lived in all aspects of his life. He was lived as a true, honest man. He was brave. He said sometimes the most inconvenient things. If he believed he was right, he would say it. His books, he says so many people, including some of his very close friends, he was really brutal. And I think I see President Isaac, I see young Kanyeihamba. And he was honest when he was wrong. And Derek is right. When we did the Rebel MP's case, sometimes it was difficult to work with him. But once you got what he was saying and listened to him, he would have his say and then give you a chance to speak. And if you were right, he would say, you are right. And so he was just an honest, brave man. But he also was really a true African man. Some people go to India and come back with Africa. Kanyeihamba was in the UK. You would never mistake his accent. He never lost his identity. He was the Muchiga through and through. One time we asked him about why he had been married for long. And so he took his beer, sipped it, licked his lips, and told us that because his wife lived in the UK and he lived here, they were able to live longer. And he said when they met, it was thunder. You know, that was the man who really, really was honest. Both communicating in so many ways. He never shied away from making jokes about himself. Lastly, you've had a lot of discussion about the appointment to the Judicial Service Commission, the process of appointment that he went through, and what we have now. Just go and read his book, I think chapter 36, The Pride and Joy of Being Myself. In that book, you learn a lot about judicial appointments and the things, why that process is now different and maintain the way we must be, change the way that the new radical bar is asking to be, that we must process. That process of appointment that elevated him to the Supreme Court is really something that I think we must study if we are to understand why many lawyers are now asking for a new process of appointment to the bench. Lastly, he was a pioneer judge of the African Court on Human and People's Rights in Arusha, Tanzania. Later controversially replaced by his friend, Justice Mulenga, may his soul rest in peace, and didn't have kind words to say about him. But he was a pioneer judge of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, an apex that had binding legal force on states, on African states, unlike the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And the story is about him going to Arusha at the Julius Nyerere Conference Center and simply taking over that court with his humor, his brilliance. Many who have gone in that court will hear endless stories about him. So for me, I remember a brave man, a man who gave his life wholeheartedly to the defense of the rule of law, of human rights, and a man who was candid, never admit his fault, but very bold to speak his truth whenever he had to do so. Yeah.
Thank you, Nicholas, for that. For you people, you are very happy to have connected with the Justice Kanyeihamba still in person. And then you are maybe for most other people interacted with reading the judgment or the lecture now you're recommending. So as a person who was never related with Honorable Justice Kanyeihamba, either through personal interactions or even judgments or literature. But for you have done that, what do you believe was his legal philosophy? And then if he was here today, what do you think he would be urging young lawyers, all lawyers entirely, to do urgently, and also judicial officers to stand for? And looking at his enduring legacy, what should we pick on from that legacy and carry it with conviction to guide us through life, and probably also live the way he lived? And by the time we are also saying goodbye to this world, we have such spaces when they are honoring our lives, having maybe followed the late legacy. Thank you, Mr. Nicholas.
I think that Justice Kanyeihamba was a constitutionalist. He believed in the power of the Constitution to realize human rights, to realize economic development, to realize a peaceful society. He truly was a constitutionalist that took legal history, the history of our country, the political history of our country, in his stride in interpreting the Constitution. I think he was the first judge in the Tinyefuza case to expand the principles of constitutional interpretation to include a reading of the preamble of the Constitution and the principles upon which this Constitution was promulgated. If you read that judgment, he expounds on, the national objectives as a basis for interpreting our Constitution. So he was a constitutionalist. He was one of those who I think was a trailblazer in making the case of the Constitution. The fact that directives and directives of state principles in our Constitution were justiciable, interpreting the Constitution. And I think that for me remains legacy that he left for this country. The second thing is this, that Justice Kanyeihamba was also a very pragmatic person. So a constitutionalist, but very pragmatic person. He wasn't utopian in his view. He went for it. You mentioned the case that they stopped him from filing at the Constitutional Court because the court staff one by one walked away. He truly believed that if he had filed his case at the Supreme Court, of course the Supreme Court couldn't hear it. But he truly believed that seized with his complaint, the Supreme Court would then just refer. So the case would have been filed. He was not a conventional person. He just thought outside of the box. And I think that when you see a young Samakad, president of the Law Society Senior Council, you saw it. He was always thinking outside the box. He really would have referred his case instead of just dismissing it. But so that is a man I worked with. And I think that young lawyers must understand that these values in legal practice. But if you stand for something, really, even if it's unpopular, really make your case. Maybe history will absolve you. Be brave, be honest, but most of all, read. Justice Kanyeihamba read extensively. Some of the things that I see my sister Stella Nyanza doing, I saw them in Kanyeihamba. He was provocative. You had to listen to him, even if you did not want to listen to him. He would drive you to pay attention to what he said. So young lawyers, I'll just ask you, read and read extensively. Read and write extensively. Read outside of the law. Read philosophy, read history, read just texts, read poetry. And you will become a far more rounded individual. And I will appreciate the law a lot better. I hope that the life of Justice Kanyeihamba will inspire you to do those things as a young lawyer and to do better than he ever did. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Nicholas, for that. I think we didn't have another question in the audience. We could have your parting shots and then we can have, we can have parting shots from Mr. Harrison and before it anything. We have to thank everyone who has joined us today. I'm sure any person who never had with Mr. Kanyeihamba, when he ever wants to find out who the man was, will look back this space, either on YouTube, we live on YouTube, or this recording, and we get to understand the kind of the man he was, and we are grateful for the books which you recommended to us to read, especially for some of us who never within elements, but now with the books we get to know the person who he was, and also very grateful for Mr. Chionga, who has lived like his son and he gave us the honorable justice of besides the law, and he is loving and caring bit. Thank you for spending your time with us from 7 p.m. up to now. These are the service conversations that happen every Wednesday. We'll be glad to have you again next Wednesday when we are back to our normal conversation. Today we are honoring an auxiliary man, and thank you for this very space today. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much, everyone who's joined us. Apologies to, I don't know how the Law Society got off. I saw Isaac was still on. I don't know how the Law Society got off. Apologies also to Mr. Ivan Okuda, who were not able to reconnect back with and who had a number of thoughts to share. But great thank you to Mr. Nicholas Opio, Mr. Derek Chionga, and Mr. Isaac Semakade, President of the Uganda Law Society. I have a number of messages. I will not be able to read them. One of them is from a former student of Professor Kanyeihamba, the Honorable Dr. Eli Karuhanga, who is not able to come onto the call right now. He was one of the first cohorts at the Makerere Law School in the early 1970s, I think the second ever class, together with Mr. Peter Kabatsi. And they grew up and worked with Professor Kanyeihamba for a long time, agreed and disagreed with him on many occasions, but always enjoyed his company. And he's not able to speak today for a number of reasons. I must say that it has been a fantastic conversation to have a chronicler like Derek Chionga. It would be a misrepresentation of Mr. Chionga's career to simply limit his career and to limit his career to discussing the legacy of Justice Kanyeihamba. We could easily have done this for Justice Odoki, for Justice Owunyidolo, for Justice Katurebe, for Justice Kavuma. I think as a person who has sat in our courts and really chronicled and spent time at the bar, you could, if you wanted to really know about the thinking of many of the lawyers, of Nicholas Opio, of Isaac Semakade, I think Mr. Chionga is almost an encyclopedia of what's happening at the bar and the bench. And I think you have displayed your encyclopedic knowledge, and we are grateful to you. I think we are grateful to Nicholas, who's always kind enough to grace our spaces, but I think Nicholas has also displayed a touch of historic proportions of having been in proximity in a number of high-profile matters. Although his recollection of some jokes needs to improve, I think he needs to learn better jokes, or at least remember better ones. But I think we're really grateful that you've been able to chronicle the time and the lessons of a life well spent, of a life well fought. We're grateful to President of Uganda Law Society, Isaac Semakade, who's taken time off and come here and given a moving and glowing tribute to the life of the late Prof.Justice Kanyeihamba, who he has called his North Star. To cite not just stories about Kanyeihamba the man and Kanyeihamba the humorist, and to read extensively from Kanyeihamba's texts, but also tell us how a judgment inspired a career, how a fidelity to law inspired a career. So I'm very grateful to those people who have come here. I am grateful to Kanyeihamba. I met Kanyeihamba in that Rebel MP's case at a personal level. I had met him previously, and I had written about this with my father, and my father had said, "This is my teacher," and he said, "Don't say that again. If you say that again, I'll tell him how you were, how I was a young, handsome student, and you were a mature entrant." And we had all burst out laughing. And but I met him really the first time in the Rebel MP's case on different sides. And Kanyeihamba, nonetheless, was extremely gracious. I had expected him to be very competitive in the case, but he was extremely gracious. I got a number of invitations to his house. I went there. I received a number of books from him, a number of discussion points from him, a number of lectures from him. And the last time I remember seeing Professor Kanyeihamba was 2 months ago, when I was told that he was in hospital, and I went to visit him. And he was unconscious. Part of his leg had been amputated. He was on dialysis. And then I looked at Kanyeihamba, and he was still Kanyeihamba. I can't explain it properly. He was still there, like energetic but unconscious. I don't know how to explain it. You could see him just still there and clearly fighting for breath and just being the Kanyeihamba that we knew him to be. I found him with a long-term caregiver of his who I always found him with at his house, a lady I think called Betty. Yes. And I really commend her for a loyalty.
He adopted her.
Yes, I'm told Derek is informing me that he adopted Betty, but every time I found him, he was with this Betty girl, and I found her there, just in the dialysis room, sitting there, and I really salute her for her loyalty to the judge. The enduring legacy that I would think Kanyeihamba gave us is Kanyeihamba and the generation that he was with, starting the law school, the Constituent Assembly. Again, and this is a message I had received from, which I think Dr. Karuhanga wanted me to read, but which I will not. But the time spent writing the Constitution, there were some really small arguments. For example, who got more votes for this particular committee or that particular committee? Then there were really big arguments. But ultimately, there was this thing that they put together that they were extremely proud of. And that Kanyeihamba then got the opportunity to fashion on the bench and remained true to the values that he held as a chairperson of the Legal and Drafting Committee of the Constituent Assembly. That Kanyeihamba sat in a court, and I really think it is a court, it is a great legacy of a man, but I also think it's a legacy of an institution. That first post-1995 Constitution Supreme Court, the Otodoki-led Supreme Court, that has two surviving judges on it who would subsequently become, who are two Chief Justices, Justice Odoki and Justice Katurebe. That court of Justice Oder, of Justice Sekoko, of Justice Karokora, of Justice Mulenga, of Justice Kanyeihamba. That court where the Brian Kalules and Isaac Semakades went to form their careers as clerks. I think the court that gave us the Semogerere and Tinyefuza decisions, the Tumukunde decisions, the court that gave us Zabwe, the court that gave us General Parts. Many people who are not lawyers may not know the impact of these sort of decisions, but they are decisions that you read, even that gave us those first presidential election petitions. There are decisions that you read that are quoted extensively across the Commonwealth, and they are decisions that show a court people who took their work seriously, who did what they believed in, who wrote what they thought, who read, who were not scared, but who are knowledgeable. And so for me, the legacy of a court that debates, that sits, and now we have had, that works with its clerks, I think it's an enduring legacy. More than that, I think we're at a place where we have so many arguments in the legal space right now and in the constitutional space right now. And sometimes there are people who are complaining about things that are deeply personal. But there's a time when the big debates in this country were debates about principle. And I think these were men who stood on the edge of principle. And I just look back at that time and think that it's an encouragement to us. When we began, and I'll start winding up now because Mercy is looking at me like I'm boring her. But when we began our judicial service campaign races, on the advice, actually, of President Semakade, I went to Chisoro and visited the families of Justice Ntabukova and Justice Mulenga, both of blessed memory. And to think of the Ntabukova, the Mulenga, the Kanyeihamba, the Sekoko, the Karokora, you know, I think to many of us in the profession, it's fair to say we are, so that verse in Hebrews that says we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Because of those witnesses who surround us, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And I think that is the challenge to many of us in the law society. So I'll wind up here. I had many other things to say, and I can see that there are people who have the misfortune of listening. So I will start winding up here. Once again, thank you so much to our guests. Thank you especially to our audience. We will end today with two clips. One will be Kanyeihamba in Kanyeihamba's words about Kanyeihamba. And the second one will be a song sung by Mr. Matovu about me. And that song, of course, as you all know, is Olimujawa Musaja Singanze. But before that, please listen to the enduring words of Professor Kanyeihamba explaining Kanyeihamba in Kanyeihamba's words, what he did and who he was. Over to you, my Lord, the Honorable Professor, Dr. Justice George Wilson Kanyeihamba, the constitutionalist.
The views, you say, why do you say so? Rather than that, but the same constitution allows the amendment. If it does, I know. I am the one who drafted it, who put it there in place. You have forgotten, I was the chairman of the legal and drafting committee. There's not a word or comma in that constitution which you didn't put it there. So when you are talking to somebody who an expert on somebody, wait until he talks. Have I said it doesn't allow?
To allow people put every word in the Constitution and every comma in it. From Kanyeihamba to all of you, thank you so much for joining us. We wish Professor Kanyeeihamba's family peace and comfort in this trying time. And as we always say on the Judicial Service Conversations, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And please, as you go to sleep, members of the Law Society, just remember these wonderful words from none other than Moses Matovu. Ole mujawa musajja asinga nze.